Rev up your engines! Today I'm going to show you how you might be able to get a really good deal on one of these Firebirds. Getting it used where it may not be as bad as it sounds. Okay, we're driving along, and when we accelerate hard, you hear that big clunk. And in this case, not only can you hear it, but if you were in a car, you can feel the clunk. It sounds horrible. So most people would say, I'm not gonna buy that car. What a clunker. But not necessarily so. I'm gonna show you how you can find out what the noise is. First, we get a jack. Jack it up in the air. Make sure you put it on the jack stand. Then you don't want to become a pancake, so put a jack stand under there. And we want to make sure both wheels are off the ground so we can turn the rear wheel. Then we'll get inside the car, turn the key on, and put it in neutral. Of course, we have to step on the brake, even on this old thing. Now it's in neutral so the wheel will spin. We want to make sure we can turn the wheel so we can move the drive shaft. Because the first thing we're going to check is for a worn universal joint on the drive shaft. Now as we crawl under the car, here's the drive shaft. If the drive shaft was worn, when we twist it, it would go clunka clunka. It doesn't, so there's nothing wrong with the drive shaft here. If it would have gone clunk clunk, the joint was bad. If it clunked in the front, it would be the front joint. And if it would have clunked in the back here, it would have been the back joint. But that's not clunking, that's fine. You can see there's no play in it. The joint isn't clunking. You hear a little noise in the rear end, but a worn car like this, you're always going to get a little noise in the rear end. But I'm not worried about the rear end in this. I can definitely tell the noise is coming from right here. Right by the right elbow of the driver or the left elbow of the passenger. It's coming from right around here. Here comes jack number 2 and a piece of wood. We're going to jack the transmission up a little. Now there's the bottom of the transmission, but we don't want to bend anything. We'll put the piece of wood on there. Then we'll start jacking. You want to get it relatively flush so the pressure's even. And now we'll jack it a little. You can see they're moving. It shouldn't move that much. So let's take a little trip to the other side. Whee! And we're going to check the transmission mount. And as you can see, it's completely broken off. This is supposed to be connected to here. There's nothing left. The rubber is supposed to insulate it. If this was metal to metal, you'd feel every vibration in the transmission and drivetrain. The rubber insulates it, but as you can see, the rubber's ripped apart. So that bang is the whole thing banging up and down when you take off fast. So here we have a vehicle that sounds like it's falling apart when you take off because the entire transmission is slamming up in the air and slamming down. I just called up AutoZone, $7.89 part. That's one big advantage of these Firebirds. They're conventional GMs. V8 engine in, fits in a lot of vehicles, parts are cheap. Get one like this that's got that giant clunk. Let's say the owner thinks it's falling apart. You can get a very good deal on one of these if that's the only thing that's wrong with it. And as long as we're here, let's check out the rest of it. Easier said than done. I'm getting old and weak. And as you can see, you don't have to buy all kinds of special equipment. Just a plain old jack and a piece of wood. Works perfectly fine. You just don't want to forget. Leave that on when you drop the normal jack, and then that would push the transmission up and start crushing stuff. You don't want the whole weight of the car on that. That's just to check the mount. Now use these as notorious rust buckets. So let's look under. Still solid. And yeah, it's all so the pipes are going to be rusty. But they're still ringing, they're not rotting away. The rear end's not leaking. And sure, the tires are dry rotting. You get a car cheap and it's old. Yeah, you're gonna have to expect to put tires on, and somebody did a really poor job spray painting the wheels to make them black. You can do all that over. But the fender walls, still nice and solid. They're not rotting out. You gotta check that. And now we can safely, slowly jack it out without bending anything. Don't be a hot dog and drop it. Let's check under the hood. Now this is a modern 5.7 GM V8. Lots of them out there. You can easily get parts for them. No problem getting parts like the alternator, water pump, run-of-the-mill stuff you can easily get at a low enough price. Let's start it up and see what it sounds like. Starts right up. Now, as you can see, this baby's got 168,000 miles on it. It does have the T-tops. Now, the headliner's going to need some work, but you expect that. And yes, you can hear the catalytic converter's a little worn. That's what that rattling noise is. No big deal. It runs okay. Now, if it did start to come apart and clog up, then it would run poorly and you'd have to replace it. When they rattle, doesn't mean that much, especially here in Tennessee. They don't do any kind of emissions inspection, so it doesn't matter if the thing's rattling. They're not going to whine at you. You You can always replace it if you wanted. This engine might have a lot of mileage on it, but man, still running smooth. It's not noisy. Let's check the flip-up headlights. Voila, they still work. And truthfully, especially when they're closed. It's a classic rear-wheel drive muscle car. And sure, the clear coat's peeling off. It could do with a respray for sure, but overall, it's still in solid shape. Hasn't been in any massive wrecks. All the parts are pretty much there. Again, this would need respraying, the plastic bumper part, but it's a good solid car. And now we'll take it for a spin. Bet that transmission mount is completely broken, so I'm not going to drive it really hard or it'll be banging up and down. Still's got a relatively smooth ride to it. Like I say, I'm not going to punch it because then it'll do the bang. And as you can hear now, the catalytic converter isn't rattling anymore. Generally they rattle at idle. And once you get going, the rattling stops as the air pushes through it. And as they warm up, the cats usually quiet down too when they start to break apart, but it's not affecting how it runs. Nut track's decent. It's got a slight pull to the right, so it's going to need a front end alignment, but you don't worry about stuff like that when you're buying an older car like that. That's chump change. As long as the frame's not bent, the suspension parts aren't all broken up, you get a pretty good deal on one of these things and have a lot of cheap fun. And as you can hear on this, the engine and the transmission are still in excellent shape. The engine runs like a dream, the transmission shifts fine, and it will stop clunking once the $7.89 transmission mount is replaced. When you're just tootling along in this thing, it's actually a quite smooth riding car. So what have we learned today? We've learned that sometimes you're looking at a used car that makes a horrible noise. Might not be as bad as you think, and you might get a great deal on a very good car cheap. So if you know that old expression, fools rush in where angels fear to tread, maybe it wouldn't be such a foolish idea to tread out one of these cars if you can get a deal like this. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Barnes' Media says, Lo, what do you think of Mitsubishi? Well, I'm not a Mitsubishi fan, but they do make good diesel engines. The engines are pretty good. A lot of people in Europe drive diesels. They drive Mitsubishi diesels and they're totally happy with them. America was never big on diesels. Mitsubishi was a failed brand here. Originally, they made a lot of cars that they sold through Chrysler. Then they tried selling them on their own. Then they kind of failed and then they kind of came back. I'm not a fan of it in the United States, but their diesel engines are solid built diesels. There's no arguing that. I know people who own them in Australia too and they love them. Here's one I'll bet you would never have thought. If you buy a Chrysler or GM car, you are giving money to Tesla. It turns out Tesla's profit that they had last year, they said they made $700-something million in profit, but $1.6 billion of their profit came from regulatory credits, and hundreds of millions were spent by Fiat Chrysler and GM. That when they get bad gas mileage, they buy these regulatory tax credits, and it went to Tesla. So when you're buying a GM or Chrysler Fiat vehicle, they paid all that money to Tesla. Guess who's paying GM to pay Tesla? You, as the person who's buying their car. So it turns out that Tesla said, oh, look, we made a profit this year. The only reason they did is because $1.6 billion came from these tax regulatory credits for pollution control, which to me is an absurd idea. You got a company that pollutes, and then they can still pollute, but if they buy these tax credits from a company like Tesla, then, oh, go ahead and go about your normal polluting ways. Pay this credit tax is what it basically turns out to. So here again, we have the government meddling in things that actually make no sense whatsoever. Suppose that they're polluting too much by making polluting cars at GM and Fiat. So they give money to Tesla. Suppose the electric, they're not polluting. Hey, they're polluting the world like mad, making the batteries, lithium batteries, building their cars, melting it down. And of course, they work on electricity. And the majority of electricity in the United States is created by petrochemical, burning coal, burning gasoline, burning gas to create. Now the gas is more efficient than using coal, but it's still using resources that they don't want to burn, and that's all creating the electricity for it. So to me, it's a giant scam on everybody, just another tax layered upon tax that we as consumers are paying. And then they pretend that, oh, we're a clean electric company. What a load of baloney. And then having the brass balls to say, look, we made a profit in 2020 of $700-something million. Yeah, take out the $1.6 billion that they got in tax credits and they'd be losing money. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.